Cumbria Integrated Care Board. So I have been in post now for just coming up to 3 years. And in that 3 years, we have been through some really difficult times. So we are not a system that started off with everything working and everything being perfect. But actually, in a way, I think that's possibly has been what's helped us to achieve successes, because we were in such a bad place that we had no choice but to make changes. So, we started off, if I just give you a quick introduction to where we are as a system. So Lancashire and South Cumbria has 4 local authorities, 2 that are unitary authorities, 2 that are county councils. And we failed 1 inspection with 9 areas of significant concern, another with 12 areas of significant concern. One has only happened this year with 4 areas of significant concern, and 1 that did pass. Lancashire County Council area that had 12 areas of significant concern, we also failed the inspection revisit and had an accelerated progress plan on 5 areas. And it was, so I came into post just a few months before we had that revisit. So that gives you a sense of where we've been at. Now, I put onto the slide deck, which is available, by the way, for after this. So I think Joe is going to send it out to everybody who is signed up to this workshop. I've just put in a reminder here of what the brief is. The first thing I think is really critically important is that we tend to think of the work we're doing on SEND as being about an improvement programme. I'm an experienced programme manager, and in all my years, previous slide still, thank you, in all my years, I have never done a programme like this. And I think it's because of the fact that SEND is actually business as usual that gets caught up within the delivery of improvement programmes, improvement activity. And so the approaches that I have developed come from being an experienced programme manager, but knowing that it doesn't work to just utilise standard forms of programme and project management in order to deliver what we've got to deliver. So what we're going to go through here today is just a sample of what I've used. I am conscious that we've not got masses of time, and I could talk to you all afternoon about everything that we use, but I would certainly be able to confirm to you that the processes that I've used and the things I'll take you through today have ultimately released Lancashire local area from the monitoring that we had from the accelerated progress plan, and have also changed things for how we're working with Cumbria, although we've still got the inspection revisit pending on that. We're one of 5 remaining areas waiting for that. I would expect that there will be 2 or 3 areas that we will still have an accelerated progress plan on. Things that you wouldn't be surprised about, autism and transitions certainly being 2 of those. But again, we've improved what we're doing through utilising what I'll take you through today. So next slide, please, Joe. So there's 4 elements to what I'm going to take you through here today. The first one is the circle that holds the ring around everything, which is our purpose. So what is it that we are trying to do? And then the 3 cogs that turn the wheel of delivery are performance, because we're aiming to get to a level of performance, process, because there's processes that will help us to get to that level of performance, but most critical, which is why it's in the biggest cog, is people. So those are the 4 areas I want to take you through today. So if we can go on to the next slide, and we'll start with purpose. The first thing that I think's so critical to say is that our purpose for doing the work we've done has not been about passing inspections. That is a byproduct of improvement and using robust practices in what we're doing. So if your focus is about passing the inspections, I'd urge you to look at what's actually in the next set. And I would imagine many of you are already doing this, and that's to consider what the problem is that we're working to solve. And I think that the problems we're working to solve are to make sure we've got good integration, joint working and partnership. And we have varying levels of all 3 of those across the 4 local authorities that we work with in Lancashire and South Cumbria. And even where we think it works extremely well in Lancashire County Council, we actually say to ourselves at the moment that we've got it really good and strong in terms of the strategic partnership, and then at differing levels of effectiveness operationally. So we're still on that journey of improving how we're doing things. Leaders' knowledge and understanding of the local area. Well, we failed on that for Lancashire. It wasn't quite worded exactly the same for Cumbria, but not far from this. And again, it wasn't worded exactly like this in terms of Blackpool, but there were items of what you would include within leaders' knowledge and understanding of the local area for Blackpool as well. And even the improvement work that we've been doing for Blackburn with Darwin, that also comes into play there too. Service redesign and service improvement, we all know we haven't got the money. There is no money out there. However much we ask for the money, it doesn't come. And we have situations like we've had with the Green Paper, where it's really evident that the money is looking to flow into education and not into health. And so that means that we are restricted to what we can do in terms of service redesign and service improvement. Critical to that, of course, is that the focus with the redesign and improvement is about delivering our statutory duties. So that is part of the purpose there and the problem that we're solving by doing that. We've then got accountability and delivery, and a critical part certainly in two of our local areas has been parent carer trust and faith in the local area. For Cumbria recently, we had a piece of feedback from a parent who said that when we started on this journey, so the inspection was in 2019, and when we started on the journey, they felt that they could have no trust and no faith in the local area at all. She said she felt that she was just mum and wasn't important and was being dismissed by people in the local area all the time. And her feedback has been that now she feels as though she's an equal partner at both a personal level and also more strategically with the work that we're doing together. She did go into more detail, but that gives you a brief sense of our processes have helped her to feel that it's a very changed system that she's part of now. And then obviously the last one is positive and appropriate impacts on children and young people. So that's what our purpose has been about in our local areas, the 4 areas that Lancashire and South Cumbria covers. Oh, I think it's worth saying as well, by the way, I have found over time that I couldn't deliver for South Cumbria without being part of the system for whole Cumbria. So what we've done is basically put me in charge of the send delivery for whole Cumbria, and then North Cumbria CCG as was, they provided project management support to me to make sure that they were part of that process of us doing things in a joined up way. And that has been critical because Cumbria is split between 2 ICSs as we were, and now 2 ICBs. That will change from the 1st of April when Cumbria is split into 2 local authorities, but currently we need to be delivering as a whole system, and that's been really helpful. Next slide. So in terms of process, I've mentioned that it's all about business as usual. And so that means that it's really critical that we keep a focus on the fact that improvement is not a full-time job for most people. So improvement's been a full-time job for me over many, many years, but also send. I know that I'm quite a rare post in that my job is pure and simple send. I do get other things added to my portfolio. So I've worked on continuing care and complex needs, and I've worked on personal health budgets and other pieces of work too. But my focus is send. So that means that when other people add work to my portfolio, I am able to say, hang on, I've not got enough capacity. I've got to deliver this for send. And I know for most of you, actually, it's the other way around, that your job is something else, unless you're a designated clinical officer. And even then you get lots thrown at you for your portfolio. It's really tough to be trying to do this improvement work alongside a full-time job. So the processes that we've employed have been all about keeping it simple and not complicating things, which leads on to the next point, which is what I have made sure we've avoided as much as possible. So I'm a commissioner, but although that's not been historically, that's not been my role. I've worked in providers prior to this role. But although I know and understand about the importance of contract management, that's not been our focus. It's been very much around service redesign. And that has at times caused a slight problem because North Cumbria CCG has a more contract management approach, but we've managed to move to a really comfortable place together around the service redesign rather than contract management. So this is a time and this is a piece of work that contract management doesn't necessarily work for. And we have to all come together to make sure that we can do things differently without wagging a finger or using performance monitoring to make sure that providers do what they need to do. Gantt charts are no help at all to programme management when it comes to SEND. At the very beginning of my career in the 80s, I worked in industry for Birds Eye Walls. And when we were doing the building of a new production line, absolutely, we used Gantt charts. But they are useless for most pieces of work that we do of programme management and project management within the NHS. And I put my head in my hands and I really struggle with the fact that the NHS is so wedded to Gantt charts as a starting point, because it is of no value to us on most things. Obviously, if we're doing a new hospital development, which I've been involved with at St Helens and Knowsley many years ago, then yes, a Gantt chart's useful for that. But most of the improvement work we're doing, Gantt charts are a waste of time. So I hope that's music to ears of people who hate some of the project management, PMO, project management office kind of approaches with things. I would also say that PIDs and pods can get in the way of delivery because we haven't got the time to be going through that in depth. However, I have developed a mini pod document that helped me because of the fact that I had 8 CCGs I was working with before we became the ICB. We needed to make sure that we only delivered warranted variation and we could avoid unwarranted variation. So if anybody does want a copy of the mini pod that I've got, I have put into chat at the start of the chat my email address. Please do feel comfortable to email me. I'd be happy to share that. And I've then put other complicated tools, and I'd add to that smart sheets. I find that smart sheets is not helping me. And this is the first time in my career, by the way, that I'm saying don't use PIDs, pods and smart sheets because they get in the way of what we've got to do. So it's not like I'm saying for all projects these are useless. For SEND, I find they are not helpful. So then we need to make sure that we define ownership. Who's going to own the overall programme? Who's going to own the individual projects and elements of projects? And that's really critical as well in terms of developing the partnership. Now, our level of partnership with Blackpool is at a different place to Lancashire. So in Lancashire, I'm delivering on something that people might expect. Yes, I'll put my email in again in a little bit. I'm in a lead on a piece of work that you might expect somebody from the county council to be leading on. But what we've said is actually to make sure we retain that strong partnership approach, we will lead on things that may not automatically fit within our portfolio. So that ownership thing has helped us with how our partnership has grown. Now, Blackpool, we've just finished doing the written statement of action, and it's been very difficult to get Blackpool to understand that with ownership, it can help to split up who's going to be the lead on something. And it did take quite a while within our written statement of action to get that across. And that's not because people didn't want to become a better partnership. That's just because it's a new territory for that council to be part of. And so we have managed to do that quite well now for the written statement of action, and that will help us. We need to define our methodology. Although I don't spout it, I use the NHS QI methodology a lot, but I don't mention quality improvement much. I don't mention stuff to do with service redesign and service improvement very much, but I use the methodologies that you would expect with that. So if any of you haven't come across it, if you Google NHS England, or actually I can't remember if it needs to be in NHSE or NHSI, so the NHS improvement, quality improvement model, you will find that the model will come up. It looks almost like a little house as a diagram, and that's a useful methodology to use. And then the last one that needs to be defined is accountability. And this is one that's really interesting when it comes to leading on things, that we can be accountable for something without having to necessarily have all the ownership of every element of leading on something. And that goes back to where I was saying that I'm accountable to the SEND partnership for everything that we do that relates to what we refer to as being improving the SEND journey. That includes EHCPs. I have nothing that I do in my job that's about EHCPs, but I get involved in conversations to make sure that we're carrying on with improving how we're doing the work. So at the moment, we're looking at how we are doing the panels for Lancashire. as an example. I'm going to use Lancashire quite often as an example. That doesn't mean that we don't do things in other areas. I just thought it might be easier to just use one local authority mostly. Mandate. So earlier on in my career, I went to do a piece of improvement work at St Helens and Knowsley Hospitals Trust, and found myself ending up as Deputy Director of HR. I didn't have a strong HR background, I have to say, but I'm a very strong negotiator and I've done a lot of work negotiating with unions prior in my career. And what I found when I came into this role, working with 8 CCGs, was that nobody was giving people a mandate to do things. And that involves our local authorities just as much as it involves, or did involve us as a group of CCGs. So I had to make sure I was getting those mandates for me to be able to do the negotiating on certain things that we had to do, or to be able to make sure that we knew the boundaries of where I could get agreements on behalf of the CCGs who were all paying my salary. Obviously, that's a bit easier now that we're an ICB, but I do find when I'm working on things like personal health budgets at the moment, that it's quite difficult when the local authorities send somebody to meetings and that person's then saying, oh, well, that's an interesting meeting, but I'll need to go back to management now to find out whether or not we can get involved with this piece of work. And so they don't have a mandate. And we're trying to work at the moment through the integration work we're doing as an ICB to improve how we can get that mandate into systems. That then helps with buy-in and clear boundaries. Then in terms of processes, it's about using a pick and mix of tools and service redesign techniques. But there's two critical bits that help to make sure that we're moving forward all the time. And that's having a data dashboard, and you heard that from the people involved in the slips, and having KPIs as well. Now, something important on KPIs, when we're given written statements of action, what we've found is that the DfE has pushed us down KPIs that are potentially impossible for us to achieve. And we found that recently with Blackpool, where we are, one of the things we've got to work on is around waiting lists for therapies, waiting time, for therapies. Now, we know for speech and language therapies, we will not be able to bring that down. It's a national issue. It's not just a local problem. And unless we are able to do something around the workforce, and that's a long-term piece of work around the workforce, we will not be able to deliver on that waiting list reduction. So, for example, we recently were doing some recruitment at Blackpool teaching hospitals where the band 7 posts, I think it was band 5, 6 and 7 posts, there were very few applicants for them. And I don't think many people, if any, were able to be recruited. The only ones we were able to recruit to were the brand new grow our own posts at band 4. So it shows that we've got a problem there. So the thing we found helped for Lancashire with KPIs that were difficult to be able to deliver on was to use what we referenced as KPI enablers. Now, other people might think of those as milestones, and yes, they are in a way, but they're also the things that are going to take us towards being able to achieve a KPI, or that demonstrate to the monitors that we're doing everything we possibly can towards delivering that KPI, even though we might not actually reach the target. And then the last bit is about governance and making sure that we've got accountable officers, senior responsible officers and project leads. But one of the things that areas I find do get wrong is putting somebody as a lead for a project, and then they're also the project deliverer. You can't mark your own homework. And I found when I was getting heavily involved with Cumbria as a whole system, that was one of the biggest problems, and the slippage always related to somewhere where somebody was the lead and the main deliverer. And obviously, if they're holding themselves to account, they're not worried about the fact they haven't been able to do the piece of work because of capacity issues. So that's process stuff. If we can go on to the next slide, please. I have got some more detailed stuff to show you in a moment around pick and mix, but I think the next one's performance. It is. So on the performance ones, we obviously need to have somebody who is doing the oversight of the work. That's having partnership governance structure, so having a partnership board. I know from when we were looking at the green paper and we started talking to other areas that we are actually quite lucky in all 4 of our areas that we have very strong partnership boards that really do involve all of our partners, and are very mature in their positioning because they've been in place for a number of years. But it's important that that partnership board has oversight of all the work that's going on. That means that they can then do a check and challenge and push. What I would say, though, that helped Lancashire was that we added in a layer of scrutiny. Now, some of our councils have said, oh, it's OK, we've already got scrutiny committees. But with Lancashire, we chose to pull out and have a scrutiny committee just on SEND. So it didn't get mixed up with other things. So we had elected members, county councillors. We had NEDs from some of the CCGs, senior leaders, and then I presented. So I would present and our senior leaders would then answer any of the questions. And that scrutiny was really tough. But because it was tough, we actually got better and better at what we were doing and how we were doing it. So then we've got accountability. So that needs to be meaningful and realistic, but there needs to be a clear lead to hold account. I do find that within the NHS, we're much more comfortable at trusting each other. However, some of the local authorities do find it harder to give up being a lead to somebody in the NHS. Now, with Lancashire, I know absolutely that our head of inclusion, I can say to Sally, it's OK, Sally, you deal with that. I'm happy for you to control on it. Equally, she's the same with me. So we've got absolute trust between us. And remember before on the cogs, I said that people was the biggest cog. And that is why, because we need to get to that place where with accountability, we can trust each other. So I'm a clear lead who's held to account. Sally is a clear lead who is held to account, even though we might also pick up bits from another sector. KPIs, they've got to be realistic and chunked down to milestones. I do find that the DfE don't always understand what a milestone is. And that's something that I have argued with 2 DfE monitors about. We don't agree, and I don't think we ever will agree, because I'm coming from a programme manager perspective. So I'm going to tell you what my perspective of my trained experience from industry and through my earlier career in universities and then into the NHS is that milestones are signposts to show that we are delivering what we said we would deliver. So they're almost like the conclusion to a sub-action. However, the DfE will say that a milestone is an event and a date. That is not a milestone, that's a conclusion of a milestone. So the date will relate to something that has finished and might be reported into a particular event. So, for example, the partnership board. So if you are finding your KPIs when they're breaking down into milestones don't feel as though they're helping you, that's where the enablers approach becomes really helpful. So you're having to do what DfE tell you to do and having a KPI that, with milestones that you know are not milestones. So then use the enablers approach, which puts you in a place where you have got your own signposts to say, we've completed that bit, then we'll move on to the next. Now, this is critical because with the DfE approach, you could have a milestone that then is to be completed in August 2023. Now, I'm a human being and I can tell you right now, with the amount of work I've got, if you tell me I've got to deliver something in August next year, there's a high chance I won't start looking at that until June, maybe July. And then I'll go, oh, shoot, I needed to have started this back in April. The things I need to put in place to make sure I can deliver for August. So if you have your milestones as being your signposts, it means that you are in a place where you've got something to focus on before you get to August 2023 that help you to be able to deliver. I know that might be sounding like I'm teaching you to suck eggs on that one, and I apologise, but it comes down to the fact that I've had those arguments with 2 DfE monitors. So then monitoring, I use highlight reports. I make sure that they are as simple as possible. They're slightly more detailed than I'd like them to be, but we just use one highlight report, and I'm going to show you some of the pages from that in a moment. And we use brag rating. Now, this is because what we found with both Lancashire when I first came into post and with Cumbria when I got heavily involved there was that people were marking things as green as being complete. So we've introduced the NHS approach, which is to have blue as complete. But a really critical part of this is that it can only be marked as blue when the evidence is with the person who is so we have somebody who has the repository for all the evidence. So if they've got the evidence, it can be marked as blue. If something's complete within time, it's green. But if the evidence isn't there, it stays green. If they still don't get the evidence in, then it might turn amber if they miss the date. And if it still doesn't come, then it becomes red. So as you can tell from that methodology, it means that people are really good at submitting their evidence to us, which helps. We also use exception reporting, so we don't have to go into detail on things. And we use a risk and issues register so that we can make sure that our senior leaders are informed when we've got a risk or an issue. And that can include something as simple as when we had a fabulous DCO, designated clinical officer, who announced in April she was retiring. We are all gutted that she's gone, although we've got a fabulous new DCO taking over her role from next Monday. But we included the fact that Anne had announced her retirement on our risk register in case we couldn't recruit, because we knew we'd had difficulty recruiting previously with one role where we'd had to re-advertise. We just didn't get any applicants at all the first time, and we knew of other areas that had had similar problems. So we include things like that and make sure that our senior leaders are informed at the earliest opportunity of anything that is a risk or issue. Does everybody know what a difference is, by the way? So a risk is something that might happen, and an issue is something that has either happened or is currently happening. And that's an important distinction between the two. We then have an action tracker. People laugh at me in Lancashire and South Cumbria because when they say the word action log, I say, could we have an action tracker, please? And the reason why I use action tracker rather than action log is because an action log is inactive. An action tracker we keep going back to and we check to see how we're delivering on that. We do the same with our risk and issues register as well. So we'll go back and have a look to see how are we doing with our mitigations against those risks and issues. Evidence, we demonstrate progress with key evidence. Minutes are not evidence. The report that went in is evidence, but not all the detail. But what we used for Lancashire, and I'm happy to share a copy of this. It's a detailed document, so I haven't got it here today for you, but we used a self-assessment. Actually, this is one of those things where I have to say it came from a DfE monitor. We built on what she suggested to us. So we created a self-assessment that we then used as our key evidence, and then the monitors for our accelerated progress plan could then ask for additional evidence on top of that. So that we had 5 columns, and those 5 columns are what the inspectors said to us. So at the point of inspection, this is what you said. What we what we did or are doing, where we're at now, what the impact of that is, and what our next steps are. And next steps for some things where now this moves into business as usual. So I'm very happy to share that with people if you want to see how we used that. So again, I'll make sure that you've got my email address in a moment. And then impact and effectiveness. One of the people on slips mentioned a most important word, and that is that actions are not impact. Activity is not an impact. So if you say an impact is that we're now having a meeting once a month, that's activity. Impact and effectiveness is about what it is for the child or young person, not the system. So you need to keep on checking back on it with each other on that. Is that an impact on the child or young person, or is that an impact on the system? And we're constantly asking ourselves that. So the next few slides, I believe, Joe, are ones where I'm going to show you the highlight report. I won't go into too much detail, but I wanted to share these with you. So this approach is what we're using for our highlight reports. They vary slightly from one local authority area to another, because I don't want it to be something that we're saying you must use this. So Blackpool, for example, has recently taken this, and I have to say I think I've added some really good improvements. So it's there's always room for improvement with this kind of thing. So you'll see top right, it's got our bragg rating, blue, red, amber, green, which is shown for the overall programme. So we were in a position of red with significant delay at the start of this year. Our previous position was that we are, yes, you do receive a copy of this presentation. And if anybody wants to copy these pages, you do not need to seek my permission. I'm absolutely fine with you just going ahead and using these pages I'm showing you now, if they help you. I've not put loads of information on here because it's not my position to do that. But it is, I thought I'd give you some examples. So this is simply just showing you some small examples of text. So on the left-hand side, so you'll see this is for Q2, and on the left-hand side, you'll see that it's got our priorities. So this is for autism. We do a highlight report that covers each of our areas of improvement. And so currently we've got more work to do on autism. We have got areas that we've completed on for the written statement of action for Cumbria, but the autism work is ongoing. And so we've got 5 actions that we need to deliver on, 5 priority areas that then have a range of sub-actions. Over on the bit next to that is then actions delivered to date. That grows over time. And so we do find that we end up with more pages of this, of the actions delivered to date. So that goes on to its own separate page. But you'll see on this front page that we have our most up-to-date actions, and we also have our risk or issue, the date that that was raised, a RAG rating. So this is not brag, it's RAG, because it's about how dangerous a position that puts us in, the significance of that risk or issue. Obviously red is the highest level of risk or issue, green is it's there but it's not in that bad a position, and then our mitigations against it. Next slide. So then we break down each of those priorities into a number of sub-actions. So what is the action, the date that we've got to deliver that by, who the lead is, and then our current position. We create a quarterly report, but on a monthly basis, we update these pages to make sure that we are able to see on a month-by-month position that then informs our quarter position. Then the next page. Then we have this is to make sure that we're all focused on what are we doing in the next month? What are we doing in the next 3 months? What are we doing in the next 6 months? Some of this comes from another page I'll show you in a moment, but you'll also see that we've got in brackets what action it links back to. So everybody's always able to see what something is related to. So you'll see there that this month and the work's been done and it's now on the local offer, that we wanted to expand from having you said we did, because families said to us, actually, we don't ever hear anything back to you. And we said, well, that's because some of these pieces of work could take 2 years for us to change. And their response was, well, why don't you tell us what you're doing? So we've changed you said we did into you said we're doing, we did. And so we're able to then keep families updated on the local offer of what we're actually in the process of delivering on that links to what they've told us we're getting wrong. So an example of that is that we were contacted by a family who had a dreadful letter. We had to agree with them. It was a dreadful letter. And we got in touch with the providers and said, we've only seen this redacted, so we don't know which of you it's from. Could you all please have a look at your letters? And they've all committed to a review of their letters with parent carers and to have new letters in place before we get to the end of this financial year. 2 of them have already got that delivered. The last one has said they'll have it finished by the end of December at the absolute latest. Families feel much better because they can see we're responding. So that gives you an example of, we keep our focus on different actions. Obviously, each month we look to see what's in the actions for next 3 months that needs to go into next month. And is there anything in the next 6 months that now needs to move over into the next 3 months? Next slide. Then we do any exception reporting and talk of any expected or actual impacts so that we're able to demonstrate that on a month-by-month and quarterly basis. And then we also identify any engagement, participation, co-production activity. We believe it's really important that we use the words engagement, participation and co-production, because if we just use the word co-production, then we find ourselves only co-producing with the same small group of parent carers. So, for example, at the moment, we're looking at the terminology around autism and we're going out to consultation at the moment, but through that, looking to find other people to work with us on that terminology, so that the terminology is about whether we use ASD, ASC, or simply the word autism. And so we will be then co-producing how we will use the language, but we'll have a broader group than the group that we've been working on that came up with the fact that they'd like us to visit this terminology issue. And then we look at next steps as well. And then I think it's the last one of this lot here, Joe. And this is one where I've given you all the information so you can see how it's working. It's all the information on one page, but we've got another 2 pages to this. So then for each, oh, no, back one. So for each of our priorities, this uses what you get for an accelerated progress plan. And so we then look for it as being the milestones that we've got to deliver on, what our impact measures and milestones are. So we're then able to demonstrate that by month 3, we'll have done, by month 6, by month 12, but you'll see over on the right hand side, we're aiming for something. And then the colours tell you, again, brag rated, as to whether we are on target, slightly behind, or not, or way behind on the delivery. Now, the greying out is, so you'll see on 2.1.1 and 2.3.1 around the data set that it's got some greyed out bits, and that's because that piece of work is then delivered at that point. Further down, you'll see that 2.3.3, it's not even started in the by 3 months, because we know we won't do that work until within the 6-month period, but it will only be for that period. So by month 6, we'll have completed that bit. So the greying out is saying it either has not started or won't be due to start, or it has been completed. Next slide. So the people bit, which is really critical to making all of this work. First of all, we have to understand cultures, behaviours, operating models and ways of working. And that's about us all being understanding of each other. I found when I first came to this role that local authorities would laugh at me because we like our flowcharts in health, and we like standard operating procedures in health. And now they don't laugh. They say to me, oh, should we do a flowchart on this? So we've got the other way around now. We've been able to understand something of our operating models. So on both sides, we've had to be much more understanding of how we work. One of our problems in health is that we don't have as long a lead in on decision making because we don't have elected members. So we would go to the local authority and say, and we need this within the next 3 months. And they'd say, you've got to be joking. We can't get that to our local, to our elected members and back to you in 3 months. So there's a lot to understand both ways around the cultures, behaviours, operating models, ways of working, and being understanding. And I have to say, this isn't about walking in each other's shoes. I hate that terminology, because if I walk in somebody's shoes for a mile, I just know what it's like to walk in those shoes for a mile. I have to know more about what their shoes are like, and what it's like walking in their shoes for them. What's their experience? It's no point walking in their shoes and what that experience is like for me. So it's very important that we have that understanding between us. That leads to partnership with trust, and also by having the focus on the same purpose. We still find we have hiccups, but because we're developing that trust, we're getting better and better at that. I'd say it's strongest with the 3 areas that had the earlier inspections. Blackpool not having an inspection until this year. We're still working on that. It's not bad. It's, you know, it's improving, but it's behind. And I do think having inspections earlier helps that to get further ahead. So I think we were disadvantaged by the system with Blackpool, not Blackpool itself being at fault. You need clear governance of what's reported and who it's reported to. That's not just about having a governance structure, but it's about the fact that we need to know what will be reported where. Having a matrix delivery system, which has mandates to deliver, which I was talking about before, about mandates to deliver. Matrix, by the way, is all about the fact that we might not all work to the same manager, but we're able to come together as a team and work together as a team. I feel incredibly fortunate that I've worked with the best team ever in my career in this role, and yet we were all working in different CCGs. I was paid by all CCGs, but I was hosted by one of those CCGs, and yet working in 8 CCGs, we all came together as one really well. And that also goes for our providers as well. There needs to be somebody who leads the programme, not just an AO, an accountable officer and a senior responsible officer, but also who is leading the programme. And I think those of you who haven't got somebody whose job is send and only send are disadvantaged. We know it has massively helped us in our system to have me in my role. And then who leads on elements of delivery and having those people given time to deliver on the elements they've got to do. We've adopted the terminology of think send, think voice. So if we're thinking about send, then we're also thinking about whose voice is involved. I've mentioned about engagement, participation and co-production. But I think an important thing here is to make sure that we are also thinking about our practitioners' voices. We did a massive piece of work just before I came into post, co-producing a referral form for autism referrals, all done with parent carers and schools. It didn't involve all of our practitioners, and as a result, it fell over, partly for the GPs, but also for some people within our 0 to 19 service doing the referral form because it was so detailed and long to do. So we've now done the engagement participation co-production with a whole system and got something that is now a digital system that we're just in the middle of testing. And I think it's going to be a really good, strong system because of the way we've done that. But Think Send, Think Voice is part of that. And then we need to understand, and you heard this from some people around SLIP earlier on, understand what can be co-produced and what can't be co-produced, but also who wants to be involved in that co-production and who doesn't. An example, by the way, of what can't be co-produced, if we've got nice guidelines on something, we have to do what the nice guidelines say. But there are elements of how we might deliver what the nice guidelines tell us to do that we can then look at how we co-produce that. Next slide. So just a recap on the key tools. We need a focus on impact from the start. So remember, that's not about activity. It's about what difference will this make to children, young people with SEND and their families. We need a governance structure in place. We need a data dashboard, and health needs to be cited on the SEN2 data, which we do in our area. An action tracker, not a log. Highlight reporting, monthly and quarterly, and include exception reporting. And risk and issues register with obviously a risk being what might happen and an issue it's already happening or happened. So I think that's it, Joe. Have we got enough time for any questions? And I'll just stick my email again into the chat.
Thank you. Yes, we do have some time for some questions now.
Anybody want to ask anything, or has anybody asked something already? Do we receive a copy of the presentation? Yes, we do. Or you do, rather. Oh, and Natasha asking for the email address. Samantha Ives saying other way round where we are. So I think that was in relation to the fact that we've got to understand systems both way rounds, and I would agree with you on that. No questions.
I just want to say thank you, really, Zoe. It's been really useful for me.
Good.
And I definitely will be getting in touch with you about
Please
some
do.
of those tools that you're using.
Yeah,
Thank
and if you want to meet up, Dawn, I'm really happy to meet up. So, you know, please do. I've learned what I've learned because I've had some amazing people in my career who've told me what to do. And I remember many years ago when I was leaving Bird's Eye Walls, I said to the guy who had been at head office that I would never be able to thank him for what I had learned from him. And he said, you can thank me by passing on what you learn. And so I've always held on to what John Smethurst told me because of that. So please do get in touch, and anything you need to know from me. But also as well, folks, if anybody's got anything that you think, well, I could use that, but I want to change it, just change it. You don't have to use things exactly as I've done it. If it works for you to change it, then just, even if it's helped you to go, I'd never do it like that. I hope that's been helpful too.
Great. Thank you.
Jacqueline.
Hi, that was a really helpful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will be emailing you because I'm just interested in how, and I might have missed it because I had to nip off and take a call, but just how you made your business case for this role and how it interlinks with some of the other roles as well, so DCO, DMO. So
I don't manage the DCOs currently. Ours are hosted in two providers. Sorry, we've got two in one provider, one in another provider, and then for Cumbria, she's recently been brought back into what was the CCG. So, and we're having a look to see how we will do that with the ICB as to whether we bring them into the ICB. But we have somebody who's a SEND lead in Lancashire and South Cumbria Foundation Trust who manages all our DCOs for us. She and I work like that. We are so close, and honestly, relationships matter most in all of this. And Helen Keaveney and I, if any of you have not got a SEND lead in providers, I know that Helen Keaveney would be happy to talk with you all about her role and share her job description as well. But it's crucial that Helen and I are really connected. So that's in terms of the DCO part of it. In terms of my role, the business case was done off the back of, we actually can't deliver this as an add-on to people's role, and how I would be able to be adding value through delivering on behalf of all of the CCGs. So each of the 8 CCGs didn't have to contribute that much money, but it meant that they could contribute, their contribution could then focus on individual projects rather than that oversight. So that was the focus. But please, Jacqueline, do get in touch and I can go into more detail for you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Samantha.
Hello, thank
Hi.
you, Zoe. That was fantastic. As a dyed-in-the-wool project manager myself, lots of what you said really So sorry.
It's all right.
As a dyed-in-the-wool project manager, lots of what you said really resonated with me in terms of those tried and tested project management, business approaches. Try as I might, sometimes I fail to apply those because the culture, I get operational staff who think that they're boring, or
Yes.
leaders who don't have the patience for it.
Yes.
And so quite often my projects fail because of those factors.
Yeah.
Also, at the moment, we're struggling with really getting our heads around the governance when we've got ICBs and 2 local authorities coming together, not quite sure how it works, joint commissioning. So that's not necessarily a question. It's just to say just how much I really respect what you've been able to achieve within the system. And is what you're doing going to create some sort of best practice pack thing?
Well, actually, my manager, who's recently stopped being my manager because of moving into the ICB, who I've got to say has been the best manager of my career, Hilary Fordham, has been amazing. And she just said to me a couple of months ago, you need to write up your approach, Zoe. So I just need to find some time to do that. I have started writing some notes down of what I could do, but unfortunately I can't even say, well, I'll do that in my spare time, because I write a novel in my spare time. Not that's my escapism, is to write.
Maybe it can be something that more junior members can write and learn at the same time whilst doing it.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah.
And the other thing that I really resonated with me was your point about saying operational leads and technical experts are not project managers, and they are very two distinct professions.
Yes.
And quite often you get the lead nurse who knows the piece of work inside out also leading the project, and it never works.
It doesn't. And actually, I think that's a really critical thing that you've brought up there. So I found that, so prior to me, there was a clinician in the role. I have to say, in the job she's doing now, she is bloody amazing. She does a fabulous role. But she would often try and do things, prior to me coming in post, she would often try to do things because of her clinical background. She'd know and understand things. And I didn't come up with this myself. Somebody else who's clinical said to me, the benefit you've got in your role is because you're not clinical, you do engagement, participation and co-production with clinical staff all the time. And that wasn't being done previously. Now, I'm not criticising my previous colleague, the colleague who previously did the role. I think that's a go-to, that because you know that you've got knowledge, you get on with it. Whereas when you know you've not got knowledge, you've got to think of a different way of bringing people on board. And I think that is a bonus of having somebody who is a program manager, a project manager, a service improvement, quality improvement lead, transformation lead. It needs to be somebody like that who has got, who's holding the ring around all the send improvement work, because they will be saying, whoa, hang on a minute, don't do that just in that arena. We need to bring it all together over here.
Yeah, they think much wider. That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that all of you will be wanting to get a cup of tea and what have you before your next session. So I hope that we've answered all questions. Has anybody put anything into the chat box? No, I think we're all right, aren't we? But please, my email address is there in chat. So if you do want to get in touch, I'm very open to that. For anybody who's listening to this as a recording and can't see that, it's z.richards1@nhs.net. That's z.richards1@nhs.net. And anybody is welcome to get in touch with me. Joe, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zoe, for the presentation today, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. We're now moving on to the second workshop now, which is on a separate invite. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Bye.